Ethan Cole's hands trembled as he checked his phone under the table. Rent payment declined, overdraft maxed, eviction notice incoming. Around him, the company holiday party sparkled with champagne and laughter while his world crumbled in silence. He'd hidden his collapse for months. The fiancée who vanished with their savings, the credit cards buried in debt, the terror that kept him awake each night. As he slipped toward the exit, desperate to escape before anyone noticed the panic in his eyes, a voice cut through the music like ice. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Cole?" CEO Vivian Cross stood blocking his path, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk, now." If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this hook grabbed you, hit that like button and stick around. What happens next will change everything. The Grand Meridian Ballroom glittered with the kind of excess that made Ethan Cole's stomach turn. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across tables laden with shrimp towers and imported cheeses, while executives in tailored suits clinked glasses of champagne that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. The company's holiday party was legendary. 300 employees celebrating another record-breaking year for Synthesis Financial Group, the investment firm that had dominated the market for 2 decades. Ethan stood near the back wall, nursing a glass of water he'd poured himself, watching colleagues dance and laugh with the kind of carefree abandon that felt like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. 6 months ago, he might have been out there with them. 6 months ago, he'd had a fiancée who loved him, an apartment he could afford, and a future that looked bright instead of terrifying. Now he had none of those things. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Ethan already knew what it was, the bank alert he'd been dreading, the one that confirmed what he'd calculated and recalculated obsessively for the past week. Insufficient funds for rent. The payment would bounce. His landlord, already irritated by 2 late payments, would serve the eviction notice she'd been threatening. And Ethan would officially join the ranks of the invisible homeless, the ones who slept in cars or on friends' couches, who showered at the gym and kept spare shirts in their desks, so no one at work suspected they were falling apart. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, the screen's glow harsh against his face. The notification was exactly what he'd expected. Payment declined. Insufficient funds. Below it, his checking balance mocked him. Negative $47.23. His savings account had been drained months ago. 3 credit cards maxed out and past due. The 4th card, his emergency backup, had just been declined at the coffee shop that morning. Ethan's throat tightened. Around him, the party roared on, oblivious. A woman in a silver dress twirled past, laughing at something her companion said. The band launched into a jazzy rendition of a holiday standard. Waiters circulated with trays of chocolate-dipped strawberries and miniature creme brulee. He had to get out of here. Ethan had perfected the art of the quiet exit over the past few months, the skill of disappearing from social obligations before anyone noticed the cracks in his facade. He'd slip out now, walk the 45 minutes back to his apartment to save the subway fare, and figure out what the hell he was going to do about rent tomorrow. Maybe he could negotiate with his landlord. Maybe he could find a payday loan, even though the interest would bury him deeper. Maybe he could... "Leaving so soon, Mr. Cole?" The voice stopped him 3 feet from the ballroom exit. Ethan turned slowly, his heart dropping into his stomach as he recognized the woman blocking his path. Vivian Cross, the new CEO of Synthesis Financial Group. The woman the business press had dubbed the Ice Queen after she'd orchestrated a hostile takeover of her previous company, fired half the executive team, and tripled shareholder value in 18 months. She'd been hired by Synthesis's board 6 months ago with a mandate to cut costs and boost profits, which, in corporate speak, meant layoffs were coming. Ethan had never spoken to her directly. She existed in a different stratosphere, executive floors, board meetings, private jets to investor conferences. Junior analysts like him were beneath her notice, part of the faceless mass of employees whose names she probably didn't know and whose jobs hung by increasingly thin threads. But now she stood directly in front of him, and her dark eyes were focused on him with an intensity that made his pulse spike. "Miss Cross," Ethan managed, forcing his voice to stay steady. I have an early morning tomorrow. Thought I'd head out." "At 8:30? One perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. party started an hour ago." She was tall, nearly 6 feet in heels, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Her black dress was simple, but clearly expensive, fitted in a way that suggested both authority and deliberate restraint. Everything about her radiated control. Her posture, her expression, the way she held her champagne glass like a prop she had no intention of drinking from. Ethan had seen her exactly 3 times since she'd joined the company. Once at the all-hands meeting where she'd outlined her strategic vision in language so sharp it had left the room silent. Once in the elevator where she'd stood perfectly still while everyone else fidgeted. And once passing through his floor, her assistant scrambling to keep up while she fired off questions that had made the department head visibly sweat. Each time, he'd kept his head down and his distance. Now there was nowhere to hide. "I'm not much for parties," Ethan said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near desperate. "Long week. You know how it is." "I do." Her gaze didn't waver. "We need to talk. Now." Ethan's mind went blank with panic. This was it. She was firing him at the holiday party. She'd noticed his declining performance, the reports submitted late, the analysis that lacked his usual depth, the days he'd shown up exhausted and hollow-eyed because he'd spent the night lying awake doing math that never added up to survival. She'd decided he was dead weight, and she was cutting him loose before the new year so it wouldn't affect next quarter's numbers. "Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" Vivian asked, but it wasn't really a question. Sure, of course." She turned without waiting for a fuller response, moving through the crowd with the kind of effortless authority that made people step aside automatically. Ethan followed, acutely aware of the eyes that tracked their movement. Melissa from accounting watching with obvious curiosity, David from his own department raising his eyebrows. The rumor mill would be churning by tomorrow. "Did you hear Cole got pulled out of the party by Cross herself? He's definitely getting fired." Vivian led him out of the ballroom, down a corridor lined with corporate art, and into a small conference room Ethan recognized as one of the executive meeting spaces. The room was dark except for the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. She flipped on the lights, stepped inside, and closed the door behind them. Then she locked it. The click of the lock seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Getting fired was one thing. Getting fired in a locked room felt like something else entirely, something his anxiety-addled brain couldn't quite process. Vivian set her champagne glass on the conference table and turned to face him fully. Her expression was unreadable, that same mask of control she wore in every meeting, every interview, every interaction Ethan had ever witnessed. "Sit down, Mr. Cole." "I prefer to stand." "Sit down." There was steel in her voice, the kind of authority that had broken union negotiations and made venture capitalists back down. Ethan sat. His legs felt weak anyway. Vivian remained standing, her arms crossed, studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. He forced himself to hold her gaze, even as sweat prickled at the back of his neck. "How long have you been with Synthesis?" she asked. 3 years, started right out of graduate school. MIT, wasn't it? Full scholarship. Thesis on behavioral economics in emerging markets. Graduated top of your program. Ethan blinked. How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things." Vivian moved to the window, her silhouette sharp against the city lights. "Your first year here, you identified a flaw in one of our algorithmic trading models that saved the company approximately $8 million. Your second year, you developed a risk assessment framework that 3 other departments adopted. Your performance reviews have been exemplary." She turned back to him. "Until 6 months ago." His stomach dropped. "I can explain." "Can you?" She walked back to the table, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting down. "Explain why your reports started coming in late. Why your analysis became surface level when it used to be brilliant. Why you've lost 15 pounds and look like you haven't slept in weeks." Ethan's hands clenched in his lap. "Personal issues. Nothing that affects my work." "Everything affects your work." Vivian leaned forward slightly. "I've been watching you, Mr. Cole. For the past 3 months, I've been watching very carefully. You think you're hiding it, but you're not. Not from someone who knows what to look for." "Watching me why?" The question came out sharper than he intended. If you're planning to fire me, just do it. I don't need the performance review first. Fire you? For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Is that what you think this is? What else would it be? Vivian was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Then she did something that shocked him more than anything else that had happened in this surreal evening. She sighed. A real human sound that cracked the facade of perfect control. You skip lunch every day, she said quietly. You wear the same 3 suits on rotation, and they're getting threadbare at the cuffs. You stopped having coffee with colleagues. You flinch every time your phone buzzes. You stayed at the office until midnight 14 times last month, not because you were working, I checked, but because you were sitting at your desk staring at your computer screen like you'd forgotten where else to go. She paused. You're broke, aren't you? The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. Ethan's face burned with shame. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to maintain the pretense he'd worked so hard to build. But sitting across from this woman who'd somehow seen through every defense he'd constructed, the lie wouldn't come. How I manage my personal finances is none of your concern, he said instead. Wrong. Vivian's voice was firm, but not unkind. When one of my highest performing employees is clearly in crisis, it absolutely is my concern. When someone with your potential is drowning, and it's affecting their work and their health, it's my responsibility to intervene. Why? The question burst out of him raw and desperate. Why would you care? You don't know me. I'm nobody. Just another junior analyst in a company with hundreds of them. You're not nobody. She said it with such certainty that Ethan felt something crack in his chest. And I know more than you think I do. She reached into a slim leather portfolio that had been sitting on the table and pulled out a thin folder. She slid it across to him. Ethan stared at it without touching it. What is this? Open it. His hands shook as he flipped open the folder. Inside were printouts, bank statements, credit reports, court documents, his bank statements, his credit reports, his eviction notice from the landlord. Everything laid bare in black and white, the canceled wedding with deposits lost, the savings account his ex-fiancée had emptied, the spiral of debt he'd been drowning in for months. Horror and fury warred in his chest. How did you get these? This is private. You can't just... I can't, Vivian interrupted calmly, but you put me down as an emergency contact when you updated your employee information last month. Do you remember doing that? Ethan's mind reeled back. He'd updated his paperwork after Rachel left, removing her from everything. He must have been so exhausted, so unfocused, that he'd filled in the CEO's name without thinking. That was a mistake. I know you didn't, but when HR flagged it as unusual and asked me to verify, I looked into why someone would list their CEO, someone they'd never spoken to, as their emergency contact. What I found concerned me enough to dig deeper. She gestured to the folder. This is what I found. A brilliant young man self-destructing in slow motion, too proud or too scared to ask for help. Ethan slammed the folder shut, his breath coming fast. You had no right. You're correct. I crossed several lines to get this information, and in any other circumstance, I'd probably face consequences for it. Vivian's expression didn't change. But I'm not in any other circumstance. I'm the CEO, and I have the authority to access employee records when I believe there's a legitimate concern for their welfare. More than that, I have the resources to actually do something about it. I don't want your charity. Good, because I'm not offering charity. She leaned back in her chair. What I'm offering is significantly more complicated than that. Ethan forced himself to breathe, to think through the panic clouding his mind. Nothing about this conversation made sense. CEOs didn't corner junior analysts at holiday parties. They didn't investigate personal finances. They didn't lock themselves in rooms to have intimate conversations about employee welfare. Unless this was something else entirely. The thought made his skin crawl. If you're expecting something inappropriate in exchange for... Stop. The word cracked like a whip. Vivian's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or offense. I'm going to pretend you didn't just imply what I think you implied, because you're clearly exhausted and terrified and not thinking straight. But let me be absolutely clear. This is not that. This is not remotely that. Then what is it? She stood up, pacing to the window again. For the first time since this conversation started, she looked uncertain, like she was weighing how much to say, how much to reveal. I was 26 years old when my husband left me, she said finally, her voice quiet. We'd been married for 3 years. I was working 80-hour weeks trying to make partner at a consulting firm, and he decided he'd rather be with someone who had more time for him, someone less ambitious, less driven, less exhausting. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. He cleaned out our joint accounts on his way out, took the car we'd bought together, left me with the lease on an apartment I couldn't afford and credit card debt from a wedding my parents had insisted on. Ethan stared at her back, unable to process this version of Vivian Cross, vulnerable, human, admitting to failure. I worked myself half to death for the next 2 years, she continued, picked up every project no one else wanted, lived on ramen and coffee, sold everything that wasn't essential. I collapsed at my desk one night from exhaustion and malnutrition, and my boss found me at 3 a.m, scared him badly enough that he actually looked into my situation. She turned back to face Ethan. He created a position for me with better pay and better hours, gave me an advance on my salary to clear my debt, made me see a therapist to deal with the stress and the shame of needing help. And he told me something I've never forgotten. What? He said, Vivian, talent is everywhere. But talent plus desperation is a tragedy waiting to happen. When you have the power to prevent that tragedy, and you don't, you're complicit in the destruction of something valuable. Her eyes met his. You're the tragedy I'm trying to prevent, Mr. Cole. The words hit him like a physical blow. Ethan felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling, felt the exhaustion and fear and shame he'd been carrying for months threatening to overwhelm him completely. I don't know what you want from me, he whispered. I want you to listen to a proposal. Actually listen, without pride or panic getting in the way. Can you do that? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Vivian sat back down, and when she spoke again, her tone was businesslike, the CEO returning, the vulnerability tucked away. Synthesis Financial Group is launching a pilot program in January. We're calling it the Executive Mentorship and Stabilization Initiative. The goal is to identify high-potential employees who are facing significant personal or financial crises and provide them with the resources they need to stabilize and thrive. She pulled another folder from her portfolio and slid it across the table. This program offers a substantial salary increase, emergency financial assistance, relocation support if needed, access to counseling and financial planning services, and direct mentorship from a senior executive. Ethan opened the folder with trembling hands. The numbers on the first page made his breath catch. The proposed salary was nearly double what he currently made, enough to clear his debt, cover his rent with room to spare, rebuild his savings. The emergency assistance package was even more shocking. Immediate funds to prevent eviction, debt consolidation support, even a stipend for professional clothing and other work necessities. This can't be real, he said. It's very real. The board approved the budget last week. I designed the program myself based on research showing that financial stress is one of the primary drivers of employee turnover and declining performance, especially among high performers. We lose talented people not because they can't do the work, but because they're too busy drowning to do it well. Why me? Why not start with someone more senior, more proven? Because you're exactly the kind of person this program is designed to help. Young, brilliant, driven, and in crisis through no real fault of your own. You didn't make reckless choices. You got engaged to someone who turned out to be untrustworthy. You faced unexpected financial blows. You tried to handle it alone because that's what people like us do. We try to be strong enough to carry everything ourselves. Vivian's expression softened slightly. But strength isn't refusing help, Mr. Cole. Strength is recognizing when you need it and having the courage to accept it. Ethan stared at the papers in front of him, his mind racing. The offer was incredible, life-changing in ways he could barely comprehend. But nothing in life came without strings, and offers that seemed too good to be true usually were. What's the catch? He asked. 3 conditions. Vivian held up one finger. First, you commit to the program for a minimum of 1 year. That means staying with Synthesis, participating fully in the mentorship process, and meeting regularly with me and the program coordinator to track your progress. Second, you provide honest feedback on the program's effectiveness so we can refine it before rolling it out more broadly. That includes data on what helps, what doesn't, and how we can better serve employees in similar situations. And third, she held his gaze. What I told you tonight about my past stays between us. I'm not ashamed of where I came from or what I survived, but I've built a professional reputation on competence and strength, not vulnerability. If that story gets out, especially attached to this program, it becomes a narrative about pity or personal agenda rather than sound business strategy. I need you to keep it confidential. Ethan processed this slowly. You're asking me to accept a massive promotion and financial help in exchange for feedback and discretion. Essentially, yes. And the mentorship part? What does that actually mean? It means you and I meet weekly, every Tuesday morning at 7, before the office gets busy. We review your work, discuss challenges, set goals. I teach you what I know about navigating corporate politics, managing stress, building resilience. You get direct access to someone who's been where you are and made it through. She paused. It won't be easy. I have high standards and I'll push you hard, but I'll also support you in ways no one else in this company can. Why would you invest this much time in someone like me? Because someone invested it in me when I needed it most, and it changed my life. Because I've watched brilliant people burn out or quit or slowly destroy themselves, and I'm tired of seeing talent wasted. Because I have the power to make a difference in your life. And I've decided that's worth the effort. Vivian leaned forward. But mostly because I see something in you that reminds me of who I used to be. Someone fighting so hard to keep their head above water that they've forgotten they deserve to breathe. The words cracked something open in Ethan's chest. He felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes and blinked them back furiously. He would not cry in front of the CEO. He would not break down completely. I don't understand why you do this, he said, his voice rough. It doesn't make sense. People don't just care? Vivian's smile was sad. Maybe they should more often. Maybe if they did, we'd lose fewer good people to preventable tragedies. Ethan looked down at the folder again, at the numbers that represented salvation, at the description of a program that sounded too perfect to be real. Every instinct he'd developed over the past months screamed that this was a trap, that nothing good could come without a terrible price. But another part of him, the part that had stayed at his desk until midnight because he had nowhere else to go, the part that had calculated subway fares against walking distances to save $2, the part that had seriously considered sleeping in his car rather than face eviction, that part whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was real. Can I have time to think about it? He asked. You can have until Monday morning. But Ethan, she used his first name for the first time, and the intimacy of it made him look up. I need you to understand something. This program is happening whether you accept or not. I'll find other candidates, help other people. But I designed it with you in mind because I believe in your potential, and I think we can build something important together. Not just for you, but for everyone else who will come after you. No pressure, right? He tried for humor and almost managed it. All the pressure in the world. I'm betting on you, Mr. Cole. The question is whether you're willing to bet on yourself. She stood, extending her hand. Ethan stood as well, taking it. Her grip was firm, professional, but there was warmth there too, something genuine beneath the corporate armor. Go home, Vivian said. Get some sleep. Actually think about this without panic clouding your judgment. And whatever you decide, know that I respect your choice. But also know that I don't make offers like this lightly, and I don't give up on people I believe in. She unlocked the door and opened it, the sounds of the party filtering back in from the distant ballroom. Ethan stepped into the hallway, still clutching the folder, his mind spinning. Mr. Cole? He turned back. Vivian stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the conference room lights, looking every inch the powerful CEO, except for something in her eyes that looked almost vulnerable. For what it's worth, I know how hard it is to accept help. I know how much pride you have to swallow, how much fear you have to push through. But I also know that the alternative, continuing to drown alone, is so much worse. She paused. You deserve better than what you've been giving yourself. I hope you'll let me help you see that. Then she was gone, walking back toward the ballroom with that same confident stride, leaving Ethan standing alone in the corridor with a folder full of impossible promises and a head full of questions he couldn't begin to answer. He walked out of the building into the December cold, the folder tucked under his arm, and started the long walk home. But for the first time in months, the walk didn't feel quite so heavy. For the first time in months, there was something besides dread occupying the space in his chest. There was hope. Terrifying, fragile, barely believable hope. And as Ethan walked through the city streets, past holiday decorations and couples holding hands and warm restaurant windows glowing with light, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to stop drowning, to breathe, to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone had thrown him a lifeline when he'd needed it most. He didn't know yet if he'd take it, but for the first time in a very long time, he knew he wanted to. The weekend passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless calculations. Ethan sat at his cramped kitchen table, the same table where Rachel had told him she was leaving, where he'd opened bill after bill with shaking hands, where he'd eaten countless meals of rice and canned beans to stretch his grocery budget, and read through Vivian's proposal for the 100th time. The numbers still didn't feel real. The salary increase alone would change everything. He'd mapped it out obsessively, rent paid on time with money left over, debt payments that would actually make a dent, the ability to buy groceries without calculating every item's cost per ounce. He could replace his worn-out shoes, get his winter coat cleaned instead of trying to scrub out the stains himself, maybe even save money again, build back the emergency fund Rachel had destroyed. But it was the other parts of the offer that kept him awake. The emergency assistance that would clear his immediate crisis. The counseling services that acknowledged he might need help processing everything he'd been through. The mentorship with Vivian herself. Weekly meetings with a woman who terrified and intrigued him in equal measure. And underneath it all, the nagging question he couldn't shake. Why him? Sunday night, Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, the one with the crack in the corner he'd promised himself he'd fix someday, and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he gotten so thin? When had those shadows under his eyes become permanent? When had he started looking like someone who'd given up? "You deserve better than what you've been giving yourself," Vivian had said. He'd replayed those words 1,000 times, trying to parse their meaning, searching for the manipulation or hidden agenda. But all he could hear was the certainty in her voice, the conviction that he was worth investing in. Maybe she was right. Maybe he did deserve better. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness, but survival. He made his decision at 2 a.m. Monday morning, watching the city lights through his window, too wired to sleep. By the time his alarm went off 4 hours later, he'd rehearsed what he'd say 100 different ways. Ethan arrived at the office at 6:45 a.m., earlier than usual, his heart hammering against his ribs. The folder with Vivian's proposal felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his messenger bag. He took the elevator to the executive floor, something he'd never done before, always taking the stairs to his department on the 8th floor, and stepped into a world of hushed luxury that felt completely foreign. The receptionist's desk was empty this early. Ethan stood in the waiting area, suddenly unsure. Did he just walk to Vivian's office, wait here, send an email? The proposal hadn't included instructions for acceptance, and he felt ridiculous not knowing the protocol for agreeing to have his life changed. "You're early." He spun around. Vivian stood in the hallway behind him, dressed in a charcoal suit with her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual severe bun. She carried a coffee from the shop across the street and looked surprisingly human, less like the Ice Queen and more like someone who'd also been up too early. "I wanted to catch you before the day started," Ethan said, "if that's okay." "It's fine, come on." She led him down the corridor to her office, unlocking the door and gesturing him inside. Vivian's office was exactly what he'd expected. Sleek, minimal, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A massive desk with nothing on it except a laptop and a single photo frame turned away from view. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with business texts and what looked like first editions of classic literature. Everything about the space screamed control and competence. "Coffee?" Vivian asked, setting her own cup down. "I'm fine, thanks." "Suit yourself." She settled into the chair behind her desk, her expression neutral. I assume you've made a decision. Ethan pulled the folder from his bag and set it on her desk. His hands were steadier than he'd expected. I want to accept the program, the mentorship, all of it. I'm in. Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction, but her voice remained professional. You understand the terms? The year commitment, the feedback requirements, the confidentiality agreement? I understand. And you're prepared for what the mentorship will actually entail? This isn't going to be me holding your hand and telling you everything's fine. I'll push you. I'll challenge you. I'll expect you to meet standards that might feel impossible at first. I wouldn't want it any other way. And surprisingly, he meant it. He'd spent months drowning in kindness from well-meaning colleagues who'd offered sympathy without solutions. What he needed wasn't someone to tell him it would all work out. He needed someone to show him how to make it work out. Vivian studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Here's how this works. I'm meeting with HR this morning to finalize the paperwork. Your salary adjustment will be retroactive to the start of this month, so your next paycheck will reflect the increase plus back pay. The emergency assistance will be processed today. You'll have access to those funds by tomorrow morning. Ethan's breath caught. Tomorrow. He could pay his rent tomorrow, could call his landlord and clear the past due balance, could stop the eviction notice before it became permanent. The counseling services are available immediately, Vivian continued. I'm recommending Dr. Sarah Chen. She specializes in financial trauma and stress management. She's who I saw when I went through my situation. You're not required to see her specifically, but I trust her. Financial trauma, Ethan repeated. Is that really a thing? It's absolutely a thing. The stress of severe financial instability triggers the same trauma responses as physical danger: hypervigilance, insomnia, panic attacks, difficulty concentrating. Your body has been in fight or flight mode for months. That doesn't just go away because the crisis is over. Vivian's expression softened slightly. Getting your finances stable is the first step. Learning to believe you're actually safe is the second. Dr. Chen can help with that. He nodded, overwhelmed by how thoroughly she'd thought this through. This wasn't just about money, it was about genuine recovery. Our first official mentorship session is tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Bring questions, bring concerns, bring whatever you're working on that you want feedback on. Vivian stood, extending her hand. Welcome to the program, Mr. Cole. I'm glad you said yes. Ethan shook her hand, and this time he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd just accepted. A lifeline, a chance, a future that looked different than the slow-motion disaster his life had become. Thank you, he said, and the words felt monumentally inadequate. I don't know how to... I can't really express... Then don't. Just show up and do the work. That's all the thanks I need. The rest of Monday passed in a haze of paperwork and quiet amazement. HR called him up to the 10th floor, and a kind woman named Janet walked him through form after form, explaining benefits and policies with patient thoroughness. The salary increase was real. The emergency assistance was real. The whole impossible offer was actually, genuinely real. You're one of the first participants in this program, Janet said as she filed the last document. Ms. Cross has been personally involved in every detail. She really believes in this initiative. She mentioned that, Ethan said carefully, mindful of the confidentiality agreement he'd signed. Between you and me? Janet leaned forward conspiratorially. I've worked here for 15 years, and I've never seen her this invested in anything that wasn't directly about profits or efficiency. Whatever she sees in you, it must be pretty special. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just smiled and thanked her. That night he logged into his bank account and watched the emergency assistance deposit appear. $15,000. $15,000. Enough to clear his past due rent, make significant payments on his credit cards, and still have a buffer left over. He sat staring at the number until his vision blurred, until the weight of 6 months of terror finally began to lift. He paid his rent that night. Paid it in full, plus the late fees, plus next month's rent, just to be safe. Then he emailed his landlord, a terse woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd been ready to evict him, and attached the confirmation. Her response came within an hour. Payment received. Eviction notice canceled. Please maintain timely payments going forward. Ethan read it 3 times, then closed his laptop and cried for the first time since Rachel had left. Not sad tears, not angry tears, but the overwhelming relief of someone who'd been holding their breath underwater and finally surfaced. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. Ethan showed up at Vivian's office at 6:55 a.m., armed with coffee he'd actually been able to afford and a notebook full of questions he'd stayed up compiling. He felt nervous in a different way than he had yesterday. Less like he was about to be fired, more like he was about to be tested. Vivian was already at her desk when he knocked. "Come in, sit." He obeyed, settling into the chair across from her. She looked as composed as ever, but there was an intensity in her focus that put him on edge. "First things first," Vivian said. "How are you doing?" "Actually doing, not the polite answer you'd give a colleague." The question caught him off guard. "I paid my rent last night, called my landlord. The eviction's canceled." "How did that feel?" "Like I could breathe for the first time in months." Ethan hesitated. "Also kind of surreal, like maybe I'll wake up and it'll all be gone." "That's normal. The hypervigilance I mentioned. Your brain doesn't trust that the danger is over. It'll take time to recalibrate." Vivian made a note on the pad in front of her. "Did you make an appointment with Dr. Chen?" "This Friday at 4. "Good. What else?" "I called 2 of my credit card companies and set up payment plans. The interest rates are still terrible, but at least I have a strategy now instead of just drowning. We'll work on the debt more strategically over the next few months. There are consolidation options and negotiation tactics that can help." Vivian leaned back. "But right now, I want to talk about your work. What projects are you currently handling?" They spent the next 90 minutes dissecting every aspect of Ethan's portfolio. Vivian tore apart his analysis with surgical precision, pointing out weak assumptions and lazy thinking he'd let slide during his months of crisis. It was brutal and exhilarating. She didn't coddle him or make excuses for his recent performance. She just expected better. "This risk assessment is garbage," she said, tapping a report he'd submitted last week. "You're capable of much deeper analysis than this. The data's here, you just didn't push hard enough to find the meaningful patterns. Redo it. I want to see version 2 by our next meeting." "Yes, ma'am." Her eyebrow arched. "Don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel ancient. Ms. Cross in professional settings, Vivian when we're working one-on-one." "Vivian," he tested the name, feeling strange using her first name. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why do you care so much about getting this right?" "The analysis, I mean. If the point is just to help me stabilize financially, the point is to help you become the analyst I know you can be," Vivian interrupted. "Financial stability is the foundation, but the real goal is watching you reach your full potential. That means holding you to the highest possible standard, not lowering the bar because you've had a hard few months." Her expression was fierce. "You're brilliant, Ethan. You were brilliant when you were drowning, and you'll be even more brilliant when you're not. But brilliance requires discipline and rigor, and someone willing to tell you when you're not living up to what you're capable of. That's what I'm here for." The intensity of her conviction left him momentarily speechless. No one had ever looked at him like that, like his potential was something worth fighting for. "I won't let you down," he said finally. "I know you won't, because I won't let you." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Every Tuesday morning at 7, Ethan arrived at Vivian's office for what became simultaneously the most challenging and most rewarding hours of his week. She was relentless in her feedback, pushing him to think deeper, question harder, defend his conclusions with airtight logic. But she was also generous with her knowledge, sharing insights from her own career, teaching him how to navigate office politics and present ideas to skeptical executives. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. With the financial pressure lifted, Ethan's work began to sharpen. The fog of exhaustion cleared. His analysis became incisive again, his presentations confident. Colleagues noticed. His department head pulled him aside to comment on his improved performance, and other analysts started asking for his input on their projects. But it was the sessions with Vivian that changed him most fundamentally. She taught him to see his work differently, to think strategically instead of just tactically. More than that, she taught him to value himself. to recognize that his worth wasn't contingent on never needing help, but on having the courage to accept it and grow from it. 6 weeks into the program, Vivian arrived at their Tuesday meeting with different energy, purposeful in a way that made Ethan sit up straighter. "The board wants an update on the mentorship initiative," she said without preamble. "They're seeing the results in your performance metrics, and they want to expand the program. That means we need to bring in more participants." "That's good, right? More people getting help?" "It's excellent, but it means we need to refine the selection process and the program structure. I want your input." Vivian slid a folder across the desk. "These are 5 candidates I've identified as potential fits. I want you to review their files and tell me what you think." Ethan opened the folder, scanning profiles of employees he recognized, people from different departments, different levels, all showing signs of the same kind of crisis he'd experienced. A single mother in accounting whose performance had declined after a divorce. A senior developer whose medical bills from a cancer scare had destroyed his savings. A marketing coordinator whose student loan debt was crushing her. "You want me to help choose who gets into the program? I want your perspective as someone who's been through it. You know what helped, what didn't, what we could do better. That insight is valuable." Vivian's expression was serious. "This is part of the deal, remember? You help refine the program so we can serve others better." Ethan spent that evening reviewing the files carefully, making notes about each candidate's situation and potential. The single mother reminded him of his own desperation. The developer's medical crisis could have happened to anyone. The marketing coordinator's student debt was a problem he had narrowly avoided through his scholarship. At their next meeting, he presented his analysis. "I think all 5 should be accepted. They're all clearly talented, clearly struggling, and clearly worth the investment. We only have budget for 3 in this next cohort." "Then get more budget." Vivian's lips quirked. "Just like that?" "You're the CEO. If you believe in this program, and I know you do, then make the board understand why it matters. Show them the numbers. My performance is up 40% since I started. That's not subjective. That's measurable value. Multiply that across 5 people instead of 3, and the ROI is obvious. You've been paying attention in our sessions. You're a good teacher." Something warm flickered in Vivian's expression. "All right, I'll push for all 5, but you're helping me with the presentation to the board. If we're expanding this program, they need to hear from someone who's actually lived it." The idea of presenting to the board terrified him. But Ethan thought about the single mother in accounting, about the developer facing bankruptcy over medical bills, about the coordinator drowning in student debt. He thought about how it had felt to be seen, to be helped, to be given a chance when he'd been certain there were no chances left. "I'll do it," he said. "When?" 2 weeks. That gives us time to prepare." Vivian stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "This is important, Ethan, not just for the program, but for changing how companies think about employee welfare. Most corporations see financial crisis as a personal failure. I want to prove it's a systemic issue that deserves systemic solutions." "You really believe that?" "I know it." She turned back to him. "I've watched too many talented people burn out or quit or destroy themselves because they were too proud to ask for help and too ashamed to admit they were struggling. That has to change. Companies have to do better." Ethan heard the passion in her voice, saw the conviction in her eyes, and understood for the first time that this program wasn't just about him. It was about something much larger. Vivian was trying to change the culture of an entire industry, and she'd chosen him as her first proof of concept. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing obsessively. Vivian taught him how to structure a board presentation, how to anticipate questions and objections, how to speak with authority about his own experience without sounding like he was begging for sympathy. She was ruthless in her feedback, making him practice his delivery until every word landed with precision. "You're not asking for charity," she reminded him during one particularly frustrating practice session. "You're presenting a business case for human capital investment. The board needs to see the value proposition, not just feel good about helping people. Lead with the metrics, support with the story." "What if they don't care about the story?" "Then they're idiots, and we'll find another way to fund the program." "But they're not idiots. They're business people." Show them that investing in struggling employees isn't weakness, it's strategic asset retention. Make them see what I see. That talent plus support equals exponential returns. The night before the presentation, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, in an apartment he no longer feared losing, and ran through his talking points for the 100th time. This mattered, not just for him, but for the single mother and the developer and the coordinator and everyone else who'd come after them. He arrived at Vivian's office at 6 a.m., an hour earlier than their usual meeting time. She was already there, reviewing the final slides. Couldn't sleep either? She asked without looking up. Too wired. Good. Channel that into the presentation. Let them see how much this matters. Vivian finally met his eyes. You're ready for this, Ethan. You know the material inside and out. You've lived it. Trust yourself. The board meeting started at 9. Ethan followed Vivian into the massive conference room, acutely aware of the 12 executives seated around the table. People who controlled budgets worth hundreds of millions, who'd built careers on hard decisions and harder numbers. He recognized a few faces from company-wide meetings, but most were strangers whose net worth probably exceeded his lifetime earnings. Vivian made the introduction smoothly. Ethan Cole, one of our junior analysts and the first participant in the Executive Mentorship and Stabilization Initiative. He'll be presenting the program outcomes and proposal for expansion. Ethan stepped up to the front of the room, his laptop connected to the presentation screen. His hands were steady, his voice was clear. He led with the numbers exactly as Vivian had taught him. His performance metrics before and after joining the program, quantified in reports completed, accuracy rates, project contributions. The data was undeniable. He'd gone from underperforming to exceeding expectations in less than 2 months. Then he told them why. 6 months ago, my fiancée emptied our joint accounts and left. I went from financially stable to drowning in debt in a matter of weeks. I worked here terrified every day that I'd be fired, that I'd lose my apartment, that I'd end up homeless. That terror affected everything: my sleep, my health, my ability to think clearly. I was so busy trying to survive that I couldn't do my job well. He saw a few executives shift uncomfortably. Good. They should be uncomfortable. This program didn't just give me financial assistance. It gave me stability, which gave me bandwidth to actually use my skills. It gave me mentorship from Ms. Cross, which sharpened those skills dramatically. And it gave me hope that I was worth investing in, which might be the most important thing of all. Ethan clicked to the next slide, showing the projected costs of the expanded program versus the projected returns in retention and performance. The 5 candidates Ms. Cross has identified represent over 20 years of combined experience and demonstrable talent. Without intervention, at least 3 of them will likely leave within the next 6 months, either because they burn out or because they find opportunities that pay enough to solve their immediate crises. Replacing them will cost approximately $450,000 in recruitment, training, and lost productivity. This program costs $375,000 to run for a full-year cohort of 5 people. Even if we only retain 3 out of 5, we break even. But if we retain all 5 and see performance improvements similar to mine, the ROI is closer to 300%. He paused, meeting the eyes of the board members one by one. But beyond the numbers, this is about what kind of company Synthesis wants to be. Do we want to be the place that treats financial crisis as a personal failure and cuts people loose when they're struggling? Or do we want to be the place that recognizes talent is worth fighting for, especially when people need help? Ms. Cross designed this program because she believes we can be better. I'm standing here as proof that she's right. The room was silent for a long moment. Then the CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Liu, spoke up. Your performance improvements are impressive, Mr. Cole, but how do we ensure that other participants will see similar results? What's to prevent this from becoming an expensive assistance program with minimal return? Ethan had prepared for this question. The program has built-in accountability measures. Participants are required to meet performance benchmarks, engage in regular mentorship sessions, and provide measurable progress updates. If someone isn't showing improvement within the first 3 months, they're moved to a different support track. This isn't a handout. It's a high expectations, high support model that requires participants to do the work. Another executive raised his hand. What about the confidentiality concerns? If word gets out that we're providing this level of financial assistance, won't everyone claim they're in crisis? Vivian stepped in smoothly. The program has strict eligibility criteria based on verifiable financial hardship and demonstrated talent. HR works with me to identify candidates through existing performance data and discrete investigation. We're not announcing this publicly. We're targeting intervention where it's needed most. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Ethan answered each one, backed by data and lived experience. Never defensive, but always honest. Vivian supported him when needed, but mostly let him handle the board himself. Finally, the chairman, an older man named Robert Chen, called for a vote. All in favor of expanding the Executive Mentorship and Stabilization Initiative to include 5 additional participants, as outlined in the proposal? Hands went up around the table. Ethan counted. 8 in favor, 3 abstaining, 1 against. Motion passes, Robert said. Ms. Cross, work with HR to finalize the participant selection. Mr. Cole, thank you for your presentation. It was refreshing to hear from someone who's actually lived through what we're trying to address. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake Ethan's hand or offer quiet words of encouragement. Margaret Liu paused. My daughter went through something similar to your situation. I wish her company had offered something like this. I'm glad ours does now. When the room finally cleared, it was just Ethan and Vivian. She was gathering her materials, her expression neutral, but he could see the satisfaction in her eyes. We did it, he said, still processing. You did it. That was all you up there. You prepared me. You made this possible. Vivian met his gaze, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed her face from intimidating to almost beautiful. We make a good team, she said simply. And standing in that empty boardroom, Ethan realized she was right. This had stopped being just a CEO helping a struggling employee. This was a partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect. They were building something important together, something that would outlast both of them. What happens now? He asked. Now we get to work. 5 new participants start next month, and you're going to help me mentor them. Vivian's smile turned slightly wicked. I hope you're ready for Tuesday mornings to get a lot more intense. Bring it on. And as they left the boardroom together, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Excitement for the future instead of dread. Purpose instead of panic. The certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The 5 new participants arrived on a Monday morning in late February, gathering in the same conference room where Ethan had first heard Vivian's impossible offer. He stood beside her now, no longer the desperate analyst hiding his collapse, but someone who'd been asked to help guide others through their own crises. The shift in perspective felt surreal. Vivian had insisted he be part of the intake process. They need to see that this works, she'd said during their Tuesday session the week before. You're the proof of concept. Let them look at you and believe recovery is possible. Now, watching the 5 people settle nervously into their chairs, Ethan saw himself reflected in each face. The single mother from accounting, Jennifer Martinez, wore a blazer with a small stain on the sleeve she'd tried to hide. The senior developer, Marcus Chen, had the same exhausted eyes Ethan remembered from his own mirror. The marketing coordinator, Amy Sullivan, kept checking her phone with barely concealed anxiety. The 2 others, a data analyst named Kevin Park and a project manager named Lisa Thompson, both had the rigid posture of people holding themselves together through sheer force of will. Vivian opened the meeting with her characteristic directness. You're here because you're talented, you're struggling, and this company believes you're worth investing in. Over the next year, we're going to provide you with financial support, mentorship, and resources to help you stabilize and thrive. In exchange, you'll commit to the program fully, meet performance expectations, and help us refine this initiative for future participants. She let that sink in before continuing. This isn't charity, this is strategic talent retention. We're betting on your potential, and we expect returns on that investment. But we're also acknowledging that financial crisis isn't a personal failure. It's often a circumstance beyond your control that deserves systemic support. Jennifer raised a tentative hand. Why us? There must be hundreds of employees dealing with money problems. There are, Vivian said, but you five represent a specific intersection of demonstrable talent, verifiable crisis, and high potential for impact. You're also at different career stages and facing different challenges, which helps us understand how to scale this program more broadly. She gestured to Ethan. Mr. Cole was our first participant. He's going to share his experience. Ethan stepped forward, acutely aware of 5 sets of desperate, hopeful eyes fixed on him. He'd rehearsed this part, but now the prepared words felt insufficient. These people needed more than a polished presentation. They needed honesty. 3 months ago, I was about to be evicted, he said simply. My fiancé had left and cleaned out our accounts. I was drowning in debt, skipping meals to save money, and terrified every single day that I'd lose my job and end up homeless. I thought I was hiding it, but Ms. Cross saw through the facade. She offered me this program, and I almost said no because accepting help felt like admitting I'd failed. Marcus leaned forward. What changed your mind? She told me that strength isn't refusing help. It's recognizing when you need it and having the courage to accept it. That hit me hard enough to push through the pride and the fear. Ethan met each person's gaze in turn. The program gave me financial stability, which lifted the constant panic. But the mentorship was what actually transformed things. Ms. Cross pushed me harder than anyone ever has. She didn't lower expectations because I'd had a tough time. She raised them because she knew what I was capable of when I wasn't drowning. And it worked? Amy's voice was small, fragile with hope. My performance metrics are up 40%. I just helped present the expansion of this program to the board, something I never would have imagined doing 3 months ago. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm actually building a career I'm proud of. He paused. But I won't lie to you. It's hard work. The weekly mentorship sessions are intense. The expectations are high. You'll be pushed out of your comfort zone constantly. This program will change your life if you let it, but you have to show up and do the work. Lisa spoke up, her voice stronger than the others. What's the catch? This sounds too good to be true. Vivian answered before Ethan could. The catch is that we're investing significant resources in you and we expect results. If you don't meet performance benchmarks, if you don't engage fully with the mentorship, if you treat this as a handout instead of an opportunity, you'll be moved to a different support track. We're not here to enable complacency. We're here to unlock potential. That's fair, Marcus said quietly. More than fair, actually. The rest of the meeting covered logistics, salary adjustments, emergency assistance processing, counseling resources, mentorship schedules. Vivian explained that she'd be personally mentoring 2 participants while Ethan would work with the other 3 under her supervision. The announcement shocked him. She hadn't mentioned that part beforehand. When the new participants left, clutching folders full of paperwork and possibility, Ethan turned to Vivian with raised eyebrows. You're having me mentor 3 people? I've been in this program for 3 months. Exactly. You remember what it feels like to be where they are right now. That makes you more effective than someone who hasn't lived it. Vivian gathered her materials. I'll supervise closely. We'll debrief after each of your sessions, but yes, you're ready for this. What if I screw it up? Then we'll learn from it and adjust. That's how programs improve. She fixed him with that intense gaze he'd come to recognize as her teaching mode. You wanted to help refine this initiative. This is how you do it, by being in the trenches, seeing what works and what doesn't, figuring out how to communicate strategies in ways that actually land. Trust yourself, Ethan. I do. His first mentorship session was scheduled for that Thursday with Kevin Park, the data analyst who'd barely spoken during the intake meeting. Ethan spent Tuesday and Wednesday reviewing Kevin's file obsessively, taking notes on his work history and the crisis that had brought him to the program, a messy divorce that had left him with massive legal bills and primary custody of 2 young kids. Thursday morning at 7, Kevin appeared at Ethan's desk, looking like he hadn't slept. Ethan had reserved a small conference room for privacy, and they settled in with coffee Ethan had brought from home. How are you doing? Ethan asked, echoing the question Vivian had posed to him months ago. Kevin laughed without humor. Honestly, I feel like I'm waiting for someone to tell me this is a mistake, that I don't actually qualify, or the program's been canceled, or it was all some kind of test. I felt exactly the same way. Took me weeks to believe the money in my account was real. Ethan set down his coffee. The hypervigilance is normal. Your brain's been in crisis mode so long it doesn't trust that the danger is over. Have you made an appointment with Dr. Chen yet? Tomorrow at 3. Ms. Cross, Vivian, she said you saw her too. Still do, actually. She helps with the stress management piece. The financial stability is crucial, but if you don't address the psychological impact of what you've been through, it'll keep affecting your work and your life. Kevin's shoulders relaxed slightly. It's good to hear someone else say that. I thought I was going crazy. The panic attacks, the insomnia, the way I can't stop checking my bank balance, even though I know the money's there now. All normal. All temporary if you work on it, but that's the personal side. Let's talk about your work. Ethan pulled out Kevin's recent project portfolio. I reviewed your last 3 reports. The quality's inconsistent. Some sections are brilliant, others feel rushed. Walk me through your process. They spent the next hour dissecting Kevin's methodology. Ethan found himself channeling Vivian's approach. Direct questions, high expectations, refusal to accept excuses while acknowledging challenges. It felt strange to be on this side of the mentorship, but also oddly natural. He knew what Kevin needed because he'd needed the same things: structure, accountability, someone who believed in his potential enough to push him toward it. Your analysis is solid when you give yourself time to think, Ethan said toward the end of the session, but you're still in survival mode, rushing through things to just get them done. Now that the financial pressure is lifting, you need to recalibrate. Give yourself permission to slow down and do the deep work you're capable of. Kevin nodded, taking notes. How long did it take you to make that shift? I'm still making it, but it started getting easier around week 6 once my brain started believing I wasn't about to lose everything. Ethan closed the portfolio. Your homework for next week. I want you to spend 1 hour, just one, on each report you submit. 1 hour where you're not thinking about anything else. No multitasking, no anxiety spiraling, just pure focus on the quality of the work. See what happens. Just 1 hour? Start small. Build the habit of deep work before you try to sustain it for longer periods. You've been in crisis mode so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to really concentrate. This is how you remember. After Kevin left, Ethan sat in the empty conference room feeling wrung out and exhilarated. That had been hard, harder than he'd expected, but also meaningful in a way his regular work never quite achieved. He understood now why Vivian had seemed so invested in his success. Watching someone unlock their potential, seeing the moment they started believing in themselves again, that was intoxicating. His Tuesday session with Vivian that week focused almost entirely on his mentorship approach. She asked detailed questions about how he'd structured the conversation with Kevin, what had worked, and what he'd improve for next time. You did well, she said finally. You met him where he was instead of where you wanted him to be. That's the key, understanding that everyone's timeline for recovery is different. He reminded me so much of myself, the panic in his eyes, the disbelief that things might actually get better. That empathy is valuable. Just don't let it make you too soft. These people need high standards as much as they need support. Maybe more. Vivian leaned back in her chair. How are your other 2 mentees coming along? Ethan had met with Jennifer and Amy earlier in the week. Jennifer was sharp and hungry to prove herself. A single mother juggling childcare and career ambitions with barely contained desperation. Amy was quieter, more anxious, drowning in student debt that had crushed her ability to take risks or think long term. Jennifer's going to be a powerhouse once she has bandwidth to breathe. She's already running circles around her department analytically. She just needs structure and confidence. Amy's trickier. The debt anxiety is so deep she's paralyzed. I'm working with her on breaking problems into manageable pieces instead of seeing everything as one massive, insurmountable mountain. Good instincts on both fronts. Keep me updated on their progress. Vivian pulled out a new folder. I want to show you something. Inside were preliminary results from the program's first quarter, retention rates, performance metrics, cost analyses. The data was remarkable. Not only had Ethan's performance continued climbing, but the 5 new participants were already showing measurable improvement in their work quality and engagement. The board is taking notice, Vivian said. Robert Chen asked me yesterday if we're planning a 3rd cohort. This is working, Ethan. It's actually working. Pride swelled in his chest, followed immediately by something else, something warmer and more complicated. He'd been spending 12 to 15 hours a week with Vivian between their Tuesday sessions and the mentorship program debriefs. He'd learned how she took her coffee, what made her laugh, the tells in her expression when she was frustrated versus genuinely angry. He knew she stayed late most nights, that she had a sister in Boston she rarely saw, that she'd grown up in a small town in Ohio and put herself through college waiting tables. And somewhere in the accumulation of all those small moments, his feelings had shifted from respect and gratitude into something he absolutely could not allow himself to feel. She was his boss. More than that, she was the CEO. She'd saved him when he was drowning, given him opportunities he'd never have gotten otherwise. Getting involved with her, even thinking about getting involved with her, would be a catastrophic violation of professional boundaries and personal ethics. It would undermine everything they'd built, cast doubt on the entire program, potentially destroy both their careers. So Ethan pushed the feelings down and focused on the work. He threw himself into mentoring Kevin, Jennifer, and Amy with obsessive dedication. He refined his own projects to ever higher standards. He helped Vivian develop training materials for scaling the program. He did everything right and ignored the way his pulse quickened when she smiled at him, the way he found excuses to stay late on Tuesday nights when he knew she'd still be in the office. March turned into April. The new participants stabilized and started thriving. Kevin's work sharpened dramatically once the financial panic eased. Jennifer got promoted within her department, her talent finally visible now that she wasn't buried under crisis. Amy started contributing creative ideas in marketing meetings instead of staying silent. The program's success created buzz within the company. Other departments wanted to know how Vivian had engineered such dramatic performance improvements. HR received inquiries from employees asking how to qualify for future cohorts. The business press started noticing. An industry journal ran a feature on Synthesis's innovative approach to talent retention. Through it all, Ethan and Vivian worked together with increasing synchronicity. They could finish each other's thoughts in meetings. They'd developed shorthand for complex ideas. Their Tuesday sessions expanded from 90 minutes to sometimes 3 hours as they debated program refinements and strategic approaches. And Ethan fell deeper into feelings he knew were dangerous, but couldn't seem to stop. It was Vivian who finally forced the conversation. Late on a Tuesday night in early May, after they'd spent 4 hours reviewing third cohort applications, she closed her laptop and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "We need to talk about something that isn't work." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Okay. I'm attracted to you." She said it with the same directness she brought to everything else, no preamble or softening. "I have been for a while now, probably longer than is professionally appropriate if I'm being honest. And I think you feel something similar, but you're too ethical to say anything because of the power dynamic and the optics and all the very legitimate reasons this would be complicated." He stared at her, his mind going completely blank. Of all the ways he'd imagined this conversation, and he'd imagined it in his weaker moments, he'd never expected her to be the one to initiate it. "I don't know what to say." "Say the truth. Are my instincts right?" Ethan wanted to lie, wanted to protect them both by denying everything. But she'd asked for truth, and after everything she'd done for him, she deserved it. "Yes," he said quietly. "You're right. I'm attracted to you. I respect you more than anyone I've ever worked with, and somewhere in the last few months that respect turned into something else. But I've been trying to ignore it because acting on it would be complicated, potentially problematic, definitely inappropriate given our professional relationship." Vivian's voice was calm, analytical, approaching this like any other problem to be solved. "Which is why we need to discuss parameters." "Parameters for what?" "For navigating this carefully, or for shutting it down completely if that's the ethical choice. I'm not sure which yet." She stood, pacing to the window like she always did when thinking through complex problems. "I'm the CEO. You're in a program I created. There's inherent power imbalance and potential for perceived impropriety, even if we're both adults making autonomous choices. If we pursued this and it went badly, you'd face more consequences than I would. That's not fair or acceptable. You've thought about this a lot." "I think about everything a lot. It's my job." She turned back to him. "But I also think about you specifically more than is strictly professional. The question is whether we address that honestly or pretend it doesn't exist. Ethan stood, needing to move, to think. What happens if we address it? If we, what, date? The optics would be terrible. People would assume you promoted me because of personal feelings. They'd question the entire mentorship program, wonder if it's just an elaborate cover for you to pursue employees you're attracted to. It would undermine everything we've built. All valid concerns, which is why if we did this, we'd need strict boundaries, complete professional separation where possible, disclosure to HR and the board to prevent accusations of deception, probably restructuring your reporting line so I'm not directly supervising you anymore. Vivian listed the parameters like she was outlining a business strategy. It's doable, but it requires both of us being willing to navigate significant complexity. Or we could just not do this. Keep it professional, maintain the boundaries that are already in place. We could. Her eyes met his. Is that what you want? Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. What he wanted was to cross the room and kiss her, to stop overthinking every implication and just feel something uncomplicated for once. But nothing about this was uncomplicated. I want to do the right thing, he said finally. For you, for me, for the program. I don't want to be the reason everything you've built gets questioned or undermined. What if I told you I've already discussed this possibility with the board? He blinked. What? Hypothetically, last month. I asked Robert Chen and Margaret Liu about the ethics and optics of a CEO dating a program participant after appropriate waiting periods and proper disclosure. They agreed that with the right safeguards, restructured reporting, full transparency, clear professional boundaries, it could be managed without compromising the program's integrity. You planned this. I considered possibilities and gathered information to make informed decisions. That's different from planning. But there was a slight smile playing at her lips. Though I'll admit I hoped the answer would be that it was manageable rather than completely forbidden. Ethan sat back down, his legs suddenly weak. Why me? You could date anyone. Why risk complications with someone who was literally falling apart when you met him? Vivian returned to her chair, and for the first time in this conversation, she looked vulnerable. Because you see me as a person, not just a position. Because you challenge my thinking and make me laugh, and genuinely care about the work we're doing together. Because watching you transform over these months, watching you go from broken to brilliant, has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my career. And because somewhere in all of that, I started wanting to know you outside of Tuesday morning meetings and program debriefs. The honesty in her voice cracked something open in Ethan's chest. He'd spent so long thinking of Vivian as untouchable, invulnerable, existing in a sphere he could never truly reach. But sitting across from him now was just a woman who'd been lonely and careful and scared to take risks with her personal life because of how much she had to protect professionally. I don't want to screw this up, he said. The program, your reputation, what we've built together. Neither do I, which is why we're going to be strategic about this. Vivian leaned forward. Here's what I propose. We wait 3 months. That gives you time to fully establish yourself outside the crisis you came from. It gives the third cohort time to launch without any appearance that the program exists for personal motives. It gives us time to implement the professional restructuring and make proper disclosures. 3 months of pretending we don't feel this? 3 months of being honest with ourselves while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Then, if we both still want to explore this, we do it carefully and transparently. Her expression was serious. I won't risk your career or reputation for my personal desires, Ethan. You matter too much for that, both personally and professionally. So we do this right, or we don't do it at all. He knew she was right, knew the careful, strategic approach was the only ethical option. But 3 months felt like an eternity when she was sitting across from him looking at him like that. Like he mattered, like he was worth waiting for, like maybe she'd been just as lonely as he had been before they found each other. Okay, Ethan said finally. 3 months. We maintain boundaries, we focus on the work, we make sure everything's structured properly, and then we see where we are. Agreed. Vivian extended her hand across the desk. Professional partners for the next 3 months. Nothing more. Ethan shook her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his, the firmness of her grip. Professional partners. But as he left her office that night, walking through the empty corridors toward the elevator, he couldn't stop replaying the conversation. Couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him when she admitted she wanted to know him better. Couldn't stop imagining what it might be like in 3 months when the boundaries finally shifted. For the first time since Rachel had left, since his life had collapsed into crisis, Ethan felt something beyond mere survival or professional ambition. He felt anticipation, hope, the possibility that maybe he could have more than just a career that was back on track. Maybe he could have something real with someone who understood him, challenged him, believed in him completely. 3 months. He could be patient for 3 months. He could focus on the work, maintain the boundaries, do everything right. And then, maybe, he could finally reach for something he wanted instead of something he merely needed. The 3 months that followed were simultaneously the longest and shortest of Ethan's life. He and Vivian maintained scrupulous professional boundaries. No late-night conversations that strayed into personal territory, no lingering glances across conference tables, no acknowledgement of the tension that hummed between them during their Tuesday sessions. They focused relentlessly on the work, and the work rewarded their focus. The third cohort launched in mid-May with 6 participants instead of 5. The board had approved expanded funding after seeing the sustained success of the first 2 groups. Ethan now mentored 4 people directly, while Vivian supervised his approach and handled the other 2 herself. The program had evolved beyond a pilot into a legitimate initiative that other companies were starting to ask about. By June, industry publications were requesting interviews. HR Journal wanted to feature the program in their fall issue. A consulting firm approached Synthesis about licensing the methodology. Vivian was invited to speak at a conference on innovative talent management strategies. The mentorship program had become Synthesis's signature approach to employee development, and Ethan found himself positioned as living proof of its effectiveness. His work had evolved too. The analysis that had once felt impossible during his crisis now came easily, sharply, with the kind of depth he'd only achieved sporadically before. His department head started assigning him higher-profile projects. Other analysts sought his input. He was building a reputation as someone who could see patterns others missed, who could synthesize complex data into actionable strategies. But underneath all the professional success, underneath the program's triumphs and his own rising trajectory, Ethan counted down the days until August 15th, the date he and Vivian had agreed upon, 3 months from that late-night conversation in her office. They never discussed it directly, never mentioned the waiting period or what would come after. But Ethan felt it in the careful distance Vivian maintained, in the way she'd end their Tuesday sessions exactly on time instead of letting them stretch into hours like before. She was honoring the boundaries they'd set, giving him space to establish himself fully outside the shadow of his crisis. Jennifer Martinez noticed the shift first. She'd become one of Ethan's closest mentees, sharp, observant, and increasingly comfortable pushing back on his feedback during their sessions. "You seem different lately," she said during their weekly meeting in early July. "More focused, maybe? Or more driven? I can't quite place it. The program's expanding. Lots of pressure to make sure we're doing it right." Ethan deflected smoothly, reviewing the financial analysis she'd prepared for her department's quarterly review. "That's not what I mean." Jennifer studied him with the same analytical intensity she brought to her work. "You're distracted, like you're waiting for something." "I'm fine. Let's talk about your presentation strategy for... Does this have anything to do with Ms. Cross?" Ethan's head snapped up. "What? I'm not blind. I've seen how you 2 work together. There's something there." Jennifer held up her hands quickly. "I'm not accusing you of anything inappropriate. I just notice things. And I notice that you look at her differently than you look at anyone else." He should have denied it, should have shut down the conversation immediately. But Jennifer had trusted him with her own vulnerabilities over the past months, her fears about balancing single motherhood with career ambitions, her lingering financial anxiety, her hope that maybe she deserved good things after years of struggle. She'd been honest with him. Maybe she deserved honesty back. "Nothing's happened," Ethan said carefully, "and nothing will happen while there's any conflict of interest or power imbalance. But yes, there's something there. We're both aware of it, and we're handling it appropriately." Jennifer's expression softened. "Good. You deserve that. You deserve something good that's just for you, not tied to work or crisis or fixing other people's problems. Says the woman I'm literally paid to mentor. You know what I mean. The program saved all of us, but it doesn't define us. You're allowed to have a life outside of being the poster child for successful intervention. She grinned. Even if that life includes dating the terrifying CEO. She's not terrifying once you know her. Oh, you've got it bad, Jennifer laughed. Just promise me you'll be careful. The optics matter, and I don't want to see either of you get burned because someone decides to make an issue out of two adults choosing to date. We're being careful, very careful. And they were. But careful was exhausting. Careful meant maintaining distance when all Ethan wanted was to close it. Careful meant professional handshakes instead of the casual touches that had started creeping into their interactions before they'd acknowledged what was happening between them. Careful meant going home alone night after night to an apartment that no longer felt like a crisis shelter, but still felt empty. The restructuring happened in late July. Ethan was promoted to senior analyst and moved to a new reporting structure that placed him under the CFO instead of his previous department head. On paper, it was a recognition of his improved performance and expanded responsibilities. In reality, it was Vivian systematically removing any direct supervisory relationship between them. Margaret Liu is thrilled to have you on her team, Vivian said during what had become their final Tuesday morning session under the old structure. She specifically requested you after seeing your work on the Q2 risk assessment. Did you tell her why the restructuring was necessary? I told her that you'd outgrown your current position and deserved expanded opportunities, which is true. Vivian's expression remained neutral, professional. The personal motivation is between us and HR. Margaret doesn't need those details. Have you spoken to HR already? I have a meeting with them next week. After the restructuring is finalized and you're officially under Margaret's supervision, then there's no conflict to disclose. Just two employees at different levels of the organization choosing to date. She paused. If that's still what you want. It was the first time either of them had directly referenced their agreement since May. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Is it what you want? I asked you first. Yes, he said simply. It's what I want. I've wanted it for months. I've wanted it since probably longer than I should admit. Something shifted in Vivian's expression. Relief. Warmth, a crack in the professional armor she'd maintained so carefully. Good. Because I've been counting down the days, and I was starting to worry you'd changed your mind. Not even close. Then let's do this right. I'll talk to HR next week and make the formal disclosure. We'll wait until that's processed before we actually go on a date or acknowledge anything publicly. But after that, she allowed herself a small smile. After that, I'm taking you to dinner somewhere that isn't this office. August 15th fell on a Thursday. Ethan woke up that morning with nervous energy thrumming through his veins. The HR disclosure had been filed the previous week. Vivian had been characteristically thorough, documenting the timeline of their professional relationship, the restructuring that eliminated supervisory conflicts, and their mutual decision to pursue a personal relationship with full transparency. The HR director, a pragmatic woman named Patricia Owens, had been surprisingly supportive. We appreciate the disclosure, she'd told Ethan during his individual meeting. Relationships happen. What matters is that you're both handling it ethically. The restructuring removes any power dynamic issues, and your performance speaks for itself. No one can claim favoritism when the metrics are this clear. She'd smiled slightly. Just keep it professional at work. No one wants to see the CEO making out in the break room. Noted, Ethan had said, fighting back a laugh. Now, sitting at his new desk in the CFO's department, Ethan tried to focus on the market analysis he was supposed to be completing, but his mind kept drifting to the text message Vivian had sent that morning. Dinner at 7. I'll pick you up at your place. Dress nice, but not too formal. And Ethan, I'm really glad we waited, but I'm even more glad the waiting is over. He must have read it 20 times, each time feeling that same flutter of anticipation mixed with disbelief that this was actually happening. You're smiling at your phone like a teenager. Margaret Liu appeared at his desk, coffee cup in hand and amusement in her eyes. Must be quite a message. Ethan quickly pocketed his phone. Just some good news. I'm sure. Listen, I need your input on the emerging markets report. Do you have 20 minutes? Work provided a welcome distraction for the rest of the day. Margaret was demanding but fair, and Ethan found he liked working directly with her analytical, no-nonsense approach. She pushed him intellectually without the emotional complexity that had begun to characterize his sessions with Vivian. At 6:30, he left the office and headed home to change. His apartment had transformed over the past months. No longer the bare-bones crisis shelter where he'd eaten ramen and calculated whether he could afford toilet paper, but a space that felt like an actual home. He'd replaced his threadbare clothes, bought real groceries, even gotten some furniture that wasn't secondhand or salvaged. The emergency fund he'd rebuilt had reached 5 figures. His credit cards were paid down to manageable levels. The physical markers of his recovery were everywhere. But tonight wasn't about where he'd been. It was about where he was going. Ethan chose dark slacks and a button-down shirt that Jennifer had helped him pick out during a recent shopping trip. "You need clothes for your actual life, not just work," she'd insisted, dragging him through stores he'd previously considered too expensive. He'd protested until she'd pointed out that he could actually afford it now, that he deserved to own things that made him feel good instead of just functional. Looking at himself in the mirror now, he barely recognized the man staring back. Not because of the clothes or the fact that he'd regained the weight he'd lost during his crisis, but because of the expression in his eyes. He looked hopeful, open, like someone who believed good things might actually happen. Vivian arrived exactly at 7, knocking on his door with the same punctuality she brought to everything. Ethan opened it to find her standing in the hallway wearing a dark blue dress that was elegant without being overly formal, her hair down around her shoulders, her usual armor of CEO authority softened into something more human. "Hi," she said, and there was a nervousness in her voice that he'd never heard before. "Hi yourself, you look beautiful." "You clean up pretty well too." She smiled, and it transformed her face the way it always did, the Ice Queen melting into someone warm and real. "Ready?" "Absolutely." She'd chosen a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood Ethan didn't know well, the kind of place with low lighting, intimate tables, and no chance of running into synthesis colleagues. They were shown to a corner table that offered privacy, and Vivian visibly relaxed once they were seated. "I wasn't sure if this would be weird," she admitted. "We've spent so many hours together over the past months, but always in professional contexts. I didn't know if we'd have anything to talk about outside of work." "We could always discuss the Q3 projections." Ethan grinned at her expression. "I'm kidding, though I did want to get your thoughts on the emerging markets analysis Margaret has me working on." "Absolutely not. No work talk tonight. That's the rule." "What do we talk about then?" Vivian considered this, her fingers tracing the stem of her water glass. "Tell me something I don't know about you. Something real, not from your employee file or program documentation." Ethan thought about it. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was younger, high school math. I loved the idea of making complex concepts click for students, watching that moment when something difficult suddenly makes sense." "What changed?" "Practical reality. My parents couldn't afford to help with college, and teaching salaries weren't enough to justify the student loan debt I'd have accumulated. Finance paid better and I was good at it, so that's where I went." He paused. "But I think that's part of why I love the mentorship aspect of the program so much. It scratches that same itch, helping people understand things, watching them transform." "You're good at it, better than you probably realize." Vivian's expression was soft. "Kevin told me last week that working with you saved his career, not the financial assistance, specifically working with you. He said you helped him remember who he was before the crisis tried to erase it." The words hit Ethan harder than he'd expected. "He said that?" "He did. You matter to these people, Ethan, not because of what you give them materially, but because of how you see them, as whole people instead of just problems to be solved. I learned that from you." "Maybe. But you brought something to it that I couldn't. Empathy without pity, high standards without judgment, the ability to push people while still making them feel safe." She met his eyes across the table. "You've become essential to this program's success. I hope you know that." They ordered food and wine, falling into conversation that flowed more easily than Ethan had dared to hope. Vivian told him about growing up in small-town Ohio, about being the scholarship kid at an elite college, about the hunger to prove she belonged in spaces that seemed determined to exclude her. Ethan shared stories about his graduate school years, the friends he'd lost touch with after Rachel left, the unexpected loneliness of professional success when you had no one to share it with. "I was lonely before you," Vivian said quietly, midway through the meal. "I'd built this career, achieved everything I'd set out to achieve, and somehow ended up more isolated than I'd been when I was broke and struggling. At least then I had peers, people going through the same things. As CEO, everyone treats you differently, carefully, like you're not quite human. I definitely thought you weren't quite human when I first met you." She laughed. "The Ice Queen reputation. I cultivated that deliberately. It was armor, but armor gets heavy after a while. When did you start wanting to take it off?" "With you. Probably that night at the holiday party when I saw you trying to slip out early and recognized every sign of someone drowning. You looked the way I must have looked years ago, desperate to hide, terrified someone would see through the facade. And I thought about how much I'd needed someone to see me then, to actually help instead of just offering sympathy." Vivian's voice dropped. "Helping you was supposed to be purely professional, but somewhere in those Tuesday mornings, watching you transform, I started seeing you as more than a project or a proof of concept. When did you know it had shifted?" "April, probably. You'd just finished presenting to the board about expanding the program, and you were so passionate about helping more people. You weren't thinking about yourself at all, just about making sure others got the same chance you'd been given. And I realized I didn't just respect you or find you professionally valuable. I wanted to know everything about you, wanted to be the person you came home to at the end of the day and told about your victories and frustrations. Wanted to matter to you the way you'd started mattering to me." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. The gesture felt momentous. The first deliberate physical contact outside of professional handshakes. The first acknowledgement that this was real and happening. "You do matter to me," he said. "You've mattered since the beginning, though it took me a while to understand the shape of it. I thought it was just gratitude at first, or admiration, or the natural bond between mentor and mentee. But it was more than that. It's been more than that for a long time." They stayed at the restaurant until closing, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other outside the context of conference rooms and program documentation. Vivian told him about her sister in Boston, about the complicated relationship with her parents who'd wanted her to marry young instead of pursuing a career. Ethan shared his regrets about graduate school friends he'd pushed away after Rachel left, too ashamed to admit how badly things had fallen apart. When the restaurant finally asked them to leave, Vivian drove him home through the quiet city streets. She parked outside his building but made no move to leave. "I should probably go," she said, but didn't reach for the door handle. "Probably," Ethan agreed, not moving either. "This was really nice. Better than I'd hoped." "It was perfect." Vivian turned to face him fully. "I want to do this right, Ethan. I want to take our time, build something real instead of rushing into intensity because we've been waiting. Can we agree to that? To letting this develop naturally?" "Absolutely. Though I have to tell you, after months of wanting to do this, natural is going to require some serious restraint." She laughed, and the sound was light and genuine. "Fair point, but worth it, I think. Definitely worth it." Ethan leaned across the console and kissed her. A soft, brief kiss that held promise without demanding more than the moment could hold. When he pulled back, Vivian's eyes were warm and slightly dazed. "Okay," she said softly. "That was definitely worth waiting for." "Same time next week?" "I'll text you." He climbed out of her car and stood on the sidewalk, watching her drive away. The night air was warm, the city humming with late summer energy, and Ethan felt more alive than he had in years. Maybe ever. The following week settled into a new rhythm. Ethan and Vivian dated carefully and deliberately, always mindful of the professional complications, but refusing to let those complications prevent them from exploring what was growing between them. They went to movies and art museums and quiet dinners at restaurants far from the office. They texted throughout the day with increasing frequency, sharing thoughts and observations that had nothing to do with work. At the office, they maintained scrupulous professionalism. No one who didn't already know would have suspected anything beyond collegial respect. But the people who did know Jennifer, Marcus, a few others who'd been observant enough to notice the shift, offered quiet support. "You look happy," Jennifer told Ethan during one of their sessions in early September. "Really happy. It's good to see." "I am happy. It's kind of terrifying, actually." "Why terrifying?" "Because I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to decide this is inappropriate, or for the board to reverse the HR approval, or for Vivian to realize she could do so much better than a guy who was literally homeless adjacent 6 months ago." Jennifer set down the report they'd been reviewing. "First of all, you were never homeless. You had temporary housing instability during a crisis. There's a difference. Second, you need to stop defining yourself by your worst moment. You're not that desperate guy from the holiday party anymore. You're a senior analyst who's helped build an industry-changing program and mentored multiple people to success. You're someone who worked his ass off to recover and turned that recovery into something that helps others. I know all that intellectually, then know it emotionally. Trust that Vivian sees you clearly and still chooses you. Trust that you deserve good things. Trust that this relationship is real and not some consolation prize for surviving a crisis." She was right. Ethan knew she was right. But years of survival thinking didn't disappear overnight, and part of him still struggled to believe he could have both professional success and personal happiness without one destroying the other. The test came in mid-September when a business journalist from Corporate Strategy Review requested an interview about the mentorship program. Ethan and Vivian both knew the article would likely mention their relationship. It was public record now through the HR disclosure, and Synthesis's leadership team had been informed. The question was how to frame it in a way that didn't undermine the program's credibility. "We tell the truth," Vivian said during the prep meeting with Patricia from HR and Robert Chen from the board. "We met through the program. We developed a professional relationship that eventually became personal. We handled it ethically through restructuring and disclosure. That's the story." "The journalist will try to make it salacious," Robert warned. "CEO dates employee she rescued. That's the headline they'll want." "Then we give them a better headline," Ethan said. "Innovative program succeeds because it treats employees as whole people. CEO and senior analysts develop relationship after proper professional protocols. Company demonstrates that ethical relationship policies work when implemented thoughtfully." Patricia nodded approvingly. "That's the angle. We're not hiding anything, but we're also not letting them reduce a legitimate program to gossip about who's dating whom." The interview took place the following week. The journalist, a sharp woman named Diana Ross, who'd built her reputation on unflinching corporate investigations, asked pointed questions about timeline and motivation. Ethan and Vivian answered honestly but strategically, emphasizing the professional safeguards they'd implemented. "Were you attracted to Mr. Cole when you first offered him a position in the program?" Diana asked Vivian directly. "No, I was concerned about an employee who was clearly in crisis despite his talent. The attraction developed over months of working together professionally, and we addressed it appropriately when it became apparent to both of us." "And you don't think the power dynamic made any relationship inherently problematic?" "I think power dynamics require careful navigation, which is why we restructured our professional relationship completely before pursuing anything personal. Ethan no longer reports to me in any capacity. We disclose to HR and the board. We maintain professional boundaries at work. We've done everything possible to ensure that our personal choices don't create conflicts or complications for the organization." Diana turned to Ethan. "Do you worry that people will assume you advanced because of your relationship with Ms. Cross rather than your merit?" "I'd worry about that if my performance metrics didn't speak for themselves," Ethan said calmly. "My work is measurable and documented. My promotion came before Vivian and I started dating, based on demonstrated value to the company. Anyone who wants to question that can review the data." "You don't think you received preferential treatment through the mentorship program?" "The program isn't preferential treatment. It's strategic intervention for high-performing employees in crisis. Every participant shows measurable improvement because we're removing barriers to success, not creating unfair advantages. I happened to be the first participant, which meant I worked closely with Vivian to develop the program. That professional collaboration eventually led to personal connection, but the causation flows from work to relationship, not the other way around." Diana asked more questions, probing for scandal or impropriety, but found none. By the end of the interview, Ethan could see grudging respect in her expression. They'd handled it well, honest without being defensive, transparent without being apologetic. The article ran in early October with the headline, "Synthesis Financial Revolutionizes Talent Retention Through Comprehensive Support Programs." The relationship was mentioned in paragraph 7, framed exactly as they'd hoped, as an example of how proper protocols allowed for both professional excellence and personal authenticity. "We did it," Vivian said, reading the article on her tablet over coffee at Ethan's apartment that Sunday morning. "She could have destroyed us with this piece, but instead it's basically an endorsement of the program and our approach to managing the personal complications. You sound surprised. I'm not used to things working out this well. Usually there's more struggle, more fighting to get people to see things the way I see them." Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Maybe you're just better at this than you think. Or maybe we got lucky. Or maybe, and here's the radical thought, we actually did everything right and deserve the good outcome." She leaned back against him. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." They'd been dating for 2 months, and Ethan had never been happier. The relationship had developed with surprising ease once the professional complications were resolved. Vivian was different outside the office, still brilliant and driven, but also funny and unexpectedly playful. She loved old movies and terrible puns. She cooked elaborate meals when she was stressed and sang off key in the shower. She was intensely private about her emotions, but generous with her affection once trust was established. And she made Ethan feel seen in ways he hadn't known he needed. Not just as the project she'd rescued or the employee she'd mentored, but as a complete person with value beyond his professional utility. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words emerging without planning or strategy. Vivian went still in his arms. Then she turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his. "You're sure? It's not just gratitude or—" "I'm completely sure. I love you. I've probably loved you for a while, but I wanted to be certain before I said it. I wanted to make sure it was real and separate from everything else." Ethan cupped her face in his hands. "I love who you are when you're tearing apart my analysis and pushing me to think deeper. I love how you care about the program participants like they're personally important to you. I love that you sing off key and make terrible puns and get this specific look on your face when you're about to prove someone wrong in a meeting. I love you, Vivian, not the CEO, not the person who saved me. You." Tears shimmered in her eyes, the first time he'd seen her cry. "I love you too. I've been terrified to say it because I didn't want you to feel obligated or pressured, but I love you so much it sometimes scares me." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and full of everything he'd been holding back during months of careful distance and strategic waiting. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vivian was smiling through her tears. "This is real," she said, like she was testing the words. "We're real." "We're real," Ethan confirmed, "and I'm not going anywhere." They spent the rest of that Sunday in comfortable domesticity, coffee and newspapers, a long walk through the park, dinner cooked together in Ethan's small kitchen. It was ordinary and perfect. The kind of quiet happiness Ethan had stopped believing he deserved somewhere during those dark months of crisis. But he deserved it. He'd worked for it, fought for it, had the courage to accept help when he needed it, and the strength to build something meaningful from that help. He'd transformed his life not through individual heroism, but through the vulnerability of letting someone see his struggles and the wisdom to trust that support could lead to genuine growth. And now, standing in his kitchen with Vivian wrapped in his arms, Ethan understood that the story that had started at a holiday party with panic and desperation had become something else entirely. It had become a story about second chances and earned success, about the courage to be vulnerable and the strength to change, about finding love in unexpected places and building futures from the wreckage of the past. It had become simply a story about being seen and choosing to see yourself differently because of it. October brought the kind of crisp fall weather that made the city feel renewed. Ethan walked through the Synthesis lobby on a Monday morning, coffee in hand, nodding to colleagues who greeted him by name. The transformation from the terrified analyst who'd tried to slip out of the holiday party to the confident professional he'd become still startled him sometimes. But the startle was fading, replaced by something steadier, genuine belief that he belonged here. that he'd earned his place through work and growth rather than luck or charity. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Board meeting at 10. They want program expansion update. Meet me at 9:30 to prep? He typed back quickly. I'll be there, bringing the Q3 data. Their relationship had settled into a rhythm that worked. Professional collaboration at the office, personal intimacy everywhere else. They were careful about public displays at work, but the secret was out in the ways that mattered. The board knew, HR knew, their immediate colleagues knew. And most importantly, no one seemed to care beyond initial curiosity because the work spoke for itself. The mentorship program had expanded to 4 cohorts now, supporting 23 employees across various departments and career stages. The retention rate was 96%. Performance improvements averaged 38% across all participants. The program had paid for itself 3 times over in reduced turnover costs alone, and the qualitative benefits, employee satisfaction, loyalty, workplace culture, were immeasurable. Ethan had become the program's unofficial ambassador. He still mentored directly, but increasingly he also trained other senior employees to serve as mentors, sharing the methodologies he and Vivian had developed. Jennifer Martinez had become a mentor herself, working with 2 participants in the latest cohort. Kevin Park was being considered for the next training group. The program was growing beyond its founders, taking on a life of its own. At 9:30, Ethan arrived at Vivian's office to find her reviewing presentation slides with her usual intensity. She looked up when he entered, and her professional expression softened into something warmer. Morning. How was your weekend? Good. Finished that analysis for Margaret, went for a run, made dinner. He set his laptop on her conference table. How was yours? Quiet, caught up on reading, talked to my sister. Vivian stood, moving to where he'd settled. She asked when she's going to meet you, by the way. Apparently I talk about you too much. Is that possible? According to Emily, yes. She says I've gone soft. Vivian smiled. She means it as a compliment, I think. I'd like to meet her, whenever you're ready for that. Thanksgiving, maybe? She's coming to the city. It would be nice to do something that feels like family. The casualness of the suggestion, the assumption that they'd still be together for Thanksgiving, that meeting family was a natural next step, made Ethan's heart warm. This was real, permanent, built to last. I'd love that, he said. They spent the next 20 minutes reviewing data for the board presentation. The numbers were strong, the narratives compelling. But what struck Ethan most was how naturally they worked together now, finishing each other's thoughts, building on ideas seamlessly, challenging and supporting in equal measure. This was partnership in its truest form. The board meeting went smoothly. Robert Chen and Margaret Liu asked thoughtful questions about scaling challenges and long-term sustainability. The newer board members wanted specifics about cost-benefit analysis and competitive advantage. Ethan and Vivian handled it all with practiced ease, presenting not just data, but a vision for how Synthesis could become the industry leader in comprehensive employee support. The program's success has attracted attention from competitors, Vivian explained. 3 firms have reached out asking to license our methodology. I propose we create a consulting division specifically to help other companies implement similar programs. It positions Synthesis as a thought leader, creates a new revenue stream, and advances the broader goal of changing how corporations treat employees in crisis. The proposal passed unanimously. As the board members filed out, several stopped to congratulate Ethan on the program's continued success. Margaret pulled him aside with a knowing smile. You two make quite the team, she said quietly. I'm glad the personal complications didn't prevent the professional collaboration. This program is too important to have been derailed by pearl clutching about office relationships. We appreciate the support, Ethan said. Just keep delivering results like this, and you'll have my support for anything you want to do. She glanced toward Vivian, who was deep in conversation with Robert. She's different now, happier, less closed off. That's good for her and good for the company. People respond better to leaders who seem human. After the meeting, Ethan returned to his desk to find an email from Diana Ross, the journalist who'd written the Corporate Strategy Review article. The subject line read, "Follow-up interview request." He opened it cautiously. Diana had been fair in her initial coverage, but journalists were unpredictable. The email explained that the original article had generated significant reader interest, and the publication wanted to do a deeper feature on the program's evolution and impact. She was requesting interviews with multiple program participants, not just leadership. Ethan forwarded the email to Vivian with a note. Thoughts? This could be good exposure or could open us up to more scrutiny. Her response came within minutes. Let's discuss with the participants. If they're comfortable sharing their stories, it could be powerful, but we don't pressure anyone. Their privacy matters more than publicity. That afternoon, Ethan met with his current mentees, 4 people at various stages of recovery and growth. He explained the interview request and made it clear participation was entirely optional. Jennifer spoke up immediately. I'll do it. I want people to know this program is real and that it works. Too many companies would have just let me struggle until I quit or got fired. Synthesis actually cared enough to intervene. Amy Sullivan, who'd been so quiet and anxious when she first joined the program, nodded agreement. I was drowning in student debt and couldn't see any way forward except slow suffocation. This program gave me breathing room and taught me I'm worth investing in. If sharing that helps other companies create similar programs, I want to do it. Marcus Chen was more hesitant. I worry about the optics of admitting I needed help. What if future employers see the article and think I'm unreliable? That's a legitimate concern, Ethan acknowledged, but I'd argue the opposite narrative is more likely, that you're someone who faced challenges head-on, accepted support, and came out stronger. That takes courage and self-awareness. Those are valuable professional qualities. And you don't regret being public about your experience? Not for a second. It's connected me with other people going through similar struggles. It's shown me that vulnerability isn't weakness. And it's let me contribute to something bigger than just my individual success. Ethan paused. But that's my choice. You need to make yours based on what feels right for you. In the end, all 4 agreed to participate. So did participants from the other cohorts when Vivian asked them. The consensus was clear. People wanted to share their stories because they understood the program's significance beyond their individual circumstances. The interviews took place over the following 2 weeks. Diana proved to be thorough and respectful, asking difficult questions but never crossing into exploitation. She interviewed 15 participants, 5 mentors, HR staff, board members, and spent hours reviewing program documentation. I'm trying to understand what makes this work when so many corporate wellness initiatives fail, she told Ethan during one of their sessions. Most companies offer employee assistance programs that are basically afterthoughts, underfunded, stigmatized, disconnected from actual career support. This is different. Why? Ethan considered the question carefully. Because it's not just about crisis intervention. It's about recognizing that financial stability and professional development are interconnected. You can't expect people to perform at their best when they're terrified about paying rent or feeding their kids. But you also can't just throw money at the problem and expect it to solve itself. The mentorship piece is crucial. It provides structure, accountability, and genuine investment in people's potential. And the fact that the CEO is personally involved? That matters? It matters enormously. When Vivian, Ms. Cross, spends her Tuesday mornings mentoring program participants, it sends a message that this isn't some HR box-checking exercise. It's a strategic priority that deserves leadership attention. People respond to that. They work harder, they engage more deeply, they believe they're worth the investment because someone at the top is demonstrating they believe it too. Diana made notes, then looked up with sharp intelligence in her eyes. You love her, don't you? Not just respect her professionally, but actually love her. The question caught Ethan off guard. That's pretty personal. It's relevant. The skeptics will say this whole program exists because the CEO wanted to date an employee. I need to understand the actual timeline and motivation to counter that narrative effectively. Ethan took a breath, choosing honesty. I love her very much. But the timeline is documented. The program existed and was showing results before either of us acknowledged any personal feelings. Our relationship developed because we worked closely together on something we both cared deeply about, and we handled the personal complications ethically when they arose. The program isn't about our relationship. Our relationship is a byproduct of working together on the program. That distinction matters. It's everything. The article was scheduled to run in the December issue, just before the holidays. In the meantime, life continued its forward momentum. Ethan's work with Margaret's team had led to a major project analyzing expansion opportunities in Asian markets. Jennifer was promoted to senior analyst. Kevin was accepted into the mentor training program. Amy led a successful marketing campaign that increased client acquisition by 22%. The program participants were thriving, and their success validated everything Ethan and Vivian had built together. In early November, Vivian took Ethan to a company retreat in the mountains, the kind of executive getaway usually reserved for senior leadership, but she'd invited him as her plus one now that their relationship was public. The retreat was held at a luxury resort with stunning views and endless opportunities for networking and strategic conversations. On the second evening, after a day of workshops and presentations, Vivian suggested they take a walk. The mountain air was cold and clean, the sky impossibly clear. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their breath making clouds in the darkness. "I need to tell you something," Vivian said finally, "and I'm not sure how you're going to take it." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Okay." "I'm attracted to you. I have been for months." She stopped walking, turning to face him with that same directness she'd brought to every difficult conversation they'd ever had. "I know we've been dating for months now. I know we've said we love each other, but I need you to understand that the attraction isn't just physical or romantic. It's intellectual and emotional and professional. I'm attracted to your mind, your integrity, your capacity for growth. I'm attracted to the way you see people and the way you push yourself. I'm attracted to everything you are." "Vivian, we've been together for months. You don't have to—" "Let me finish." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I'm saying this now because we're at a point where this relationship could become something permanent. And before we go there, I need you to know that choosing you isn't settling or convenience or gratitude for what we've built professionally. It's active choice based on genuine attraction to who you are as a complete person." Ethan felt emotion clog his throat. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because we started from such an unequal place. I was the powerful CEO. You were the desperate employee. I saved you. That's the narrative, even if it's more complicated than that. And I need you to know that I don't see you as someone I saved anymore. I see you as my equal, my partner, someone I choose every day because you make my life better and fuller and more meaningful." He pulled her close, holding her against the mountain cold. "I know that. I've known that for a while now. We're not that desperate analyst and powerful CEO anymore. We're just two people who found each other and built something real. But you deserve to hear it said clearly. You deserve to know you're chosen, not just helped." "I love you," Ethan said simply. "And I choose you too, every day, for as long as you'll have me." Vivian kissed him under the mountain stars, and Ethan felt the last lingering shadow of his crisis finally dissolve. He wasn't defined by what he'd survived anymore. He was defined by what he'd built, the career he'd reconstructed, the program he'd helped create, the relationship he'd chosen and nurtured into something extraordinary. Thanksgiving came with the meeting of families. Vivian's sister Emily arrived from Boston, a warmer, more outgoing version of Vivian, who immediately interrogated Ethan with cheerful intensity. "So you're the one who made my sister human again," Emily said over wine while Vivian cooked. "She talks about you constantly. It's adorable and slightly disturbing." "I like to think we made each other human," Ethan said diplomatically. "Good answer, but seriously, she's different now, happier, less wound up. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." The dinner was chaotic and warm, full of laughter and stories, and the kind of easy affection that comes from genuine connection. Watching Vivian with her sister, seeing her relaxed and playful, Ethan felt grateful for the life they were building together. The Corporate Strategy Review article dropped on December 1st. The headline read, "How Synthesis Financial Revolutionized Corporate Compassion and Made It Profitable." The piece was extensive, featuring interviews with program participants, detailed analysis of the financial and cultural impact, and thoughtful examination of the ethical considerations around workplace relationships. Diana had done exactly what Ethan had hoped. She'd told the story of the program's success while addressing the relationship questions head-on. She'd interviewed HR experts who confirmed that Vivian and Ethan's approach was ethical, She'd included quotes from board members praising their transparency. She'd presented their relationship not as scandal, but as evidence that proper protocols allowed for both professional excellence and personal authenticity. The response was overwhelming. Within days, Synthesis received inquiries from over 30 companies interested in implementing similar programs. The consulting division Vivian had proposed was suddenly drowning in potential clients. Business schools requested case studies. HR organizations invited them to speak at conferences. The program had gone from internal initiative to industry phenomenon. But with visibility came scrutiny. Not everyone was supportive. A few critics questioned whether any relationship between a CEO and an employee could truly be ethical, regardless of protocols. Some accused Synthesis of using the program as publicity rather than genuine care. Others suggested the success was overstated or unsustainable. Ethan expected the criticism to bother him more than it did. But he'd learned something important over the past year. You couldn't control other people's narratives, only your own integrity. The work spoke for itself. The transformed lives spoke for themselves. The 23 people who'd gone from crisis to thriving spoke for themselves. 2 weeks before Christmas, HR called Ethan for an unexpected meeting. He arrived at Patricia Owen's office with some trepidation, wondering if the recent publicity had created new complications. Instead, Patricia smiled warmly and gestured him to sit. Relax, this is good news. The board has approved a new position, Director of Employee Development and Mentorship. It's a senior leadership role focused on expanding the program both internally and through our new consulting division. The compensation is substantial, the authority is real, and the opportunity to shape corporate culture on a broad scale is significant. She slid a folder across the desk. We'd like to offer it to you. Ethan opened the folder, scanning the job description and compensation package. The salary was nearly triple what he'd been making when Vivian first found him. The responsibilities were exactly aligned with the work he'd come to love most: mentoring, program development, strategic thinking about how to support people in crisis. This is incredible, he said. But won't people say I'm only getting it because of my relationship with Vivian? Some people will say that regardless of the facts. Your job is to prove them wrong through excellent work, which you've already demonstrated you're capable of. Patricia leaned forward. This offer isn't about your relationship with Ms. Cross. It's about your proven ability to build and scale a program that's having measurable impact. It's about your mentorship skills and your strategic thinking and your ability to connect with people across all levels of the organization. You've earned this, Ethan. Don't let fear of other people's opinions keep you from accepting what you've legitimately achieved. He thought about the analyst who'd tried to slip out of the holiday party a year ago, terrified and broken and certain he was about to lose everything. That person would never have imagined this moment, not just the job offer, but the confidence to believe he deserved it. I accept, Ethan said, and thank you for believing I've earned it. You have. Now go tell your girlfriend she's losing her best mentor to a job you're overqualified for. Ethan laughed and headed to Vivian's office. She was on a call when he arrived, but she gestured him in and wrapped up quickly. You look happy, she observed. Good meeting with Patricia? They offered me the Director of Employee Development position. Vivian's face lit up with genuine delight. That's wonderful, though entirely expected. You're the obvious choice. You knew about this? The board consulted me, yes. I recused myself from the final decision to avoid any appearance of favoritism, but I strongly supported the creation of the position and your candidacy for it. She stood, moving around her desk. You've built something extraordinary, Ethan. You deserve to lead it. We built it together. We started it together, but you've made it yours through the work you've put in, the people you've mentored, the vision you've brought to scaling it. This is your achievement as much as mine. Maybe more. He pulled her close, holding her in the quiet of her office. Thank you for all of it. For seeing me when I was invisible. For helping me when I was drowning. For pushing me when I was coasting. For loving me when I finally figured out how to be someone worth loving. You were always worth loving. You just needed to believe it yourself. That night, they celebrated at the same Italian restaurant where they'd had their first official date. Over wine and pasta, they talked about the future. Not just the program's expansion or Ethan's new role, but their personal future together. I want you to move in with me, Vivian said. My place is bigger, and you're there half the time anyway. It seems silly to maintain 2 apartments when we're building a life together. Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm completely sure. I love waking up with you. I love coming home to you. I want that to be our normal, not just occasional. Then yes, absolutely yes. They toasted to new beginnings, to shared futures, to the unexpected paths that led to the right destinations. And sitting across from the woman who'd saved him and challenged him and loved him completely, Ethan felt the full weight of how far he'd come. A year ago, he'd been desperate and terrified, hiding his collapse behind professional facades, certain he was about to lose everything. Now he was loved and secure, leading work that mattered, building a future he'd never dared to imagine. The transformation hadn't been easy or simple. It had required vulnerability and courage and the willingness to accept help when every instinct screamed to handle things alone. It had required hard work and high standards and someone who cared enough to push him toward his potential instead of accepting his limitations. But most of all, it had required being seen, truly seen, by someone who recognized that crisis didn't define him, that potential mattered more than present circumstances, that investment in people could yield extraordinary returns. Christmas arrived with snow and celebration. Ethan spent Christmas Eve moving his belongings into Vivian's apartment, their apartment now. They worked together late into the night, hanging pictures and arranging furniture, creating a space that felt like home for both of them. On Christmas morning, they exchanged gifts over coffee. Ethan gave Vivian a first edition of her favorite novel. She gave him a framed photo of the two of them at the company retreat, both laughing at something outside the frame, looking genuinely happy. "I love it," he said. "Though we look ridiculously happy." "We are ridiculously happy. We've earned the right to be." Later that day, they went to dinner with Jennifer, Marcus, Kevin, Amy, and several other program participants who'd become more than colleagues. They'd become family. The gathering was loud and warm, full of stories and laughter, and the kind of genuine connection that came from shared struggle and mutual support. Jennifer raised her glass in a toast to the program that changed our lives, to the people who built it, and to the proof that companies can do better when they choose to care. Everyone drank to that. Then Marcus added his own toast, to Ethan and Vivian, who showed us that accepting help isn't weakness, and that second chances are real if you're brave enough to take them. More glasses raised, more affirmation spoken, and Ethan felt the truth of it settle into his bones. He'd been part of building something that mattered, something that would outlast all of them, something that would continue changing lives long after this specific moment faded into memory. As the evening wound down and people headed home to their own celebrations, Ethan and Vivian walked back to their apartment through the snowy streets. The city was quiet, peaceful, wrapped in holiday magic. "This time last year," Ethan said quietly, "I was certain my life was over. I couldn't see any way forward except slow disaster. And now? Now I see possibility everywhere. Now I understand that rock bottom can be a foundation if you let the right people help you build on it." Vivian squeezed his hand. "You did the building. I just provided some tools and showed you where to start." "You did more than that. You saw someone worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. You invested in potential when most people would have written me off. You held me to standards that made me better instead of lowering expectations because I was struggling. That's what love looks like sometimes. High expectations combined with unwavering support." They reached their building and climbed the stairs to their apartment. Inside, the space they'd created together glowed with warm light. Ethan looked around at the home they were building, the life they were constructing, the future they were choosing together. "I love you," he said, "and I'm grateful every day that you stopped me at that holiday party instead of letting me slip away." "I love you too, and I'm grateful you had the courage to say yes when everything in you probably wanted to refuse." They stood together in their living room, holding each other as snow fell outside the windows. The journey from that desperate moment at the holiday party to this peaceful evening had been long and difficult and transformative. But every struggle had been worth it. Every vulnerable moment had led to growth. Every risk had yielded rewards beyond what either of them could have imagined. Because that was the truth Ethan had learned through crisis and recovery, through mentorship and love, through the hard work of rebuilding a life from collapse. The greatest transformations came not from individual heroism, but from the courage to be seen, the wisdom to accept help, and the strength to believe you deserved better than what you'd been giving yourself. He'd started in a locked room with a woman who'd said one sentence that flipped his world. This stays between us. And he'd ended, or rather, continued, in a home they shared, a life they built together, a future they chose openly and honestly and with full transparency. The secret conversation had become a public partnership. The rescue had become mutual growth. The crisis had become a catalyst for creating something larger than either of them alone could have imagined. And standing there with Vivian in their apartment, Ethan understood that this was what recovery looked like. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just accepting help, but paying it forward. Not just rebuilding a life, but constructing something better than what existed before. The mentorship program would continue expanding. More people would be helped. More lives would be transformed. More proof would accumulate that compassion and strategy weren't opposites, but partners in creating sustainable success. But for tonight, Ethan was content to simply be here, loved and secure, purposeful and peaceful, exactly where he belonged. The journey had been hard, but the destination was worth every difficult step. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and continue building the future they'd chosen together, one Tuesday morning at a time, one mentorship session at a time, one transformed life at a time. Because that was what they'd created together. Not just a program or a relationship, but a vision of how work and life and love could coexist when people had the courage to care and the wisdom to invest in what mattered most. The story that had started with desperation and ended with hope was really just beginning. And Ethan couldn't wait to see where it went next.